Good idea. I think Mr. Bakke may attend, but there he is. Look at that. We're waiting for you, Mr. Bakke.
As usual. Sit next to Fred.
Okay, I think we have critical mass. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 8th, 2012 meeting of the Implementation Committee of the State Allocation Board. I'm Bill Savage. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board. And if we could go around the horn here and do introductions, appreciate it.
Gary Gibbs, California Building Industry Association.
Dennis Dunstan, Council of Ed.
Richard Conrad, Division of the State Architect.
Thank you, Richard. Dennis Dunstan, Council of Educational Facility Planners.
Mary Morris, American Institute of Architects.
Michael Watanabe, Office of Public School Construction.
Paul Hansen, County Schools.
Kathy Allen, Coalition for Adequate School Housing. Lee Coop, Coalition, what is it? California Association of School Business Officials. Thank you. I knew I was going to do that. CASBO.
Eric Bakke, Los Angeles Unified.
Fred Yeager, Department of Education.
It's just you wear a lot of hats, Lee, and you know. So besides being mom and facility director and all that. I want to, before we go any further, I do want to let everyone know and congratulate Michael Watanabe, who was promoted to Chief of Program Services for the Office of Public School Construction. And so then that means he draws the short straw and gets to sit in on our meetings with us. But welcome, Michael, and well-deserved congratulations. So just want to make sure everyone knows we are webcasting this meeting, so please do use your microphone, Mr. Conrad. And everyone. And I think that we'll have a fairly brief meeting today, assuming that I know I don't want to jinx it or anything, but I did want to just make sure everyone is aware that we do have a number of subcommittee meetings for the State Allocation Board that are coming up. Next week on Tuesday the 12th is a meeting of the Department of Defense Facilities Subcommittee of the State Allocation Board. That will be held here in the Capitol to review some of the issues that the board discussed related to military installation schools and the possibility of finding state funding to support that. We had a meeting earlier this week of the Audit Working Group and of the Audit Subcommittee of the State Allocation Board, and made a lot of progress in that meeting. We're tentatively scheduling a follow-up meeting of the Audit Working Group on July 3rd, and then looking at a meeting going back to report back to the Audit Subcommittee in August, in the first week in August. And we also have a meeting of the Rules and Procedures Subcommittee of the State Allocation Board tentatively scheduled for August 15th. Yes, sir.
Is the DOD meeting, will that be webcast?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All of the subcommittee meetings are webcast, and even the working group meetings are webcast. We're trying to make sure we get the message out, and then people that can't get to Sacramento are able to participate in the meetings. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover, and obviously we have a State Allocation Board meeting on June 27th, which is going to be sort of a twofer, since the board meeting in May was postponed. So we do have a lot on our plate in June, and look forward to a really good discussion at that meeting. Any other items that members of the committee have in terms of informational things you want to share? Is there any public comment from the audience for items that is not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Let's start out with the first item on our calendar, and this is what I call the available funds item, or the Oceanside item, but in your agenda is listed as proposed regulatory changes to the priority and funding process, and Mr. Jeremy McCarroll from the Office of Public School Construction is going to present the item.
Thank you, Bill. One of the things we talked about in our priority funding discussion last month was the issue of the board's current inability to make apportionments at certain times because of the way the priority funding filing periods that were established. Problem is that currently a priority funding round ends when the current filing period begins. So in the case of this past January's board meeting, for example, the previous round's apportionment requests expired before the January meeting, and then the next filing period didn't end until after the January meeting, so that left the January meeting with no apportionments to approve. Last month we presented proposed regulatory changes that would essentially allow those apportionment requests to remain valid for a longer period of time. And while the wording of our proposal has changed pretty substantially, our intent is still the same. That is, increase the number of times a year the board may make apportionments. Before we get into the proposed language itself, there was one other concept that we discussed briefly last month that we've since incorporated into the proposal, and that concept related to changing the dates of the rounds to better align with the timing of potential bond sales. So we're proposing changing the dates of the filing periods so that one lasts from mid-May to mid-June and the other lasts from mid-November to mid-December. In the case of the November-December period, we chose those dates so that OPSC could present the Department of Finance with up-to-date information on January 1st that relate to districts' ability to participate in the priority funding process. Having a new list to DOF by January 1st assists them in making more timely and accurate projections of cash needs from bond sales for any potential spring bond sale. Similarly, the May to June filing period means OPSC can get DOF a timely list on July 1st, which will help them with their projections for potential autumn bond sales. With that said, we've also slightly adjusted when apportionment requests are valid relative to the filing period, but might be best to look at at an attachment for that. So if you'll turn to page 7, attachment D, the idea is that requests submitted, as you can see on the bottom, the proposed process, requests submitted during the November-December filing period will be eligible for an apportionment from January 1st to June 30th of the following year. And then requests submitted during the May-June filing period will be eligible for an apportionment from July 1st to December 31st. So not only are we able to provide DOF with information when it can be most helpful, we've also created a situation where the board can make apportionments at every board meeting. One slight drawback, though, needs to be sort of a transition period that would have to take place as the current regulations replaced our proposal, and that has to do with simply not knowing exactly when the proposal may become effective pursuant to Office of Administrative Law procedures. So basically, in order to provide DOF with information on July 1st of 2013, because we're not going to make January 1st of 2013, we'll need to have the May-June filing period. But if you look at page 6, the regs, well, because we're just not sure, the regs may not go into effect until after the current, like January, February filing period starts. So we want to keep that filing period and then move towards May, June. So the window for the apportionments for that May, February is going to be shorter. But again, it's because we don't exactly know when we can start with the new rounds. But like we indicate on the next page, after that transition, we'll have a full 6 months of worth of a round, and the board can make apportionments every month. With that, unless Billy, you want me to read the actual language itself, I was ready for comments. The actual proposed text, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you just go ahead and do
Sure.
that? And
that'll be on page 4, 90.2, the priority funding process. Got a chart that sort of illustrates what has happened in the past and this transition period that I alluded to. So the filing period, as you can see, January, August of 2012. The request will be valid until January 8th of 2013. We'll have the traditional January 9th to February 7th filing period, and those requests will be valid until May 7th. And then beginning on May 8th, 2013, the filing periods will continue with the second Wednesday of May and the second Wednesday of November, each calendar year thereafter. Requests submitted during the filing period, beginning with the second Wednesday of May, are valid from July 1st to December 31st of that year, and requests submitted during a filing period beginning with the second Wednesday in November will be valid from January 1st until June 30th of the following year. And that about does it.
So let's, before we open it up to questions, are we, I just, from a broad perspective of what we're looking at as we look ahead, I mean, we're at the end of, or nearing the end of our bond authority in the current program. Do we think, I'm just a rhetorical question, do we assume that we're going to continue to have priority in funding as our mechanism for dispersing funds in the foreseeable future, even under a new bond? I'm not really sure why I'm asking that, but well, I'm just I mean, anyway, go ahead. Sure.
Well, I think it would continue until the point where the pool money investment mechanism would kick back in and projects would be funded as they are approved, wouldn't it? Rather than having a unfunded list?
I don't have an answer to your question. I'm not sure if anyone has an answer to your question, Bill. But I think Dennis is right. I mean, I think we continue with what we've got until something tells us differently. Ideally, it worked best when we had access to the AB 55 loans, and it made the process work a lot smoother. I just don't know if that's going to be in our future anytime soon. I just don't know. So what I'd like to do is try to focus on how we can improve this process. Okay. I do have a couple questions if I can. Go for it. I really like the idea of trying to tie the dates so that there's enough information for the Department of Finance to make informed decisions. I think that's a great idea. And I also like the idea of changing the regulations so it's the authorization period is moved to the end of the next filing period as opposed to the beginning, because that picks up that extra month. Right. The only question I have and the concern, and maybe they're just suggestions for group discussion, is I don't recall why we have in the regulation now the second Wednesday of January and the second Wednesday of July, because it seems like putting it on the later in the month makes it difficult to assess the certifications that came in during the filing period, so that we can't really get to, right now the way I'm reading it is that January is the filing period, so it's kind of a blackout period. But by the time we get out of the second week of February, which would be the end of that filing period, there isn't enough time to get everything set up so we can make apportionments in that February. Is that correct?
Currently, that's correct, yeah.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
And so I'm just curious, why do we have the second as the point and maybe not just the first of the month? I guess so you have more time on the back end to try to get into the February SAB meeting as opposed to just skipping, because the filing period is kind of butts up to. I'm just trying to figure out why we did that in the first place. I don't recall.
I don't either.
I'm afraid I couldn't help with that.
I don't recall why we did the original, the second Wednesdays of each month. Really, it doesn't matter, though, if we did the second or the first or within a calendar month.
Not enough time.
Either way, we're not going to have enough time for that window to hit the next board.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I just want to see if that maybe give you an extra week would be helpful to try to get to that February or not.
It didn't work, but the way we, going to the attachment D, the way we did it instead was to make it as efficiently as possible. As we just said, well, let's make the previous round certs valid for 2 more weeks past the other rounds opening and closing. That way we can still keep going to boards, though. So we're trying to solve that. So previously, where we had potentially 4 dead boards, we couldn't give apportionments. The way we've gone now, we've eliminated all the dead boards. We can go to any potential board with a valid list now. So
perfect. I think that's
that. We think.
I think that's great. Then the other question I had is I was looking at the charts on page 6. Mm-hmm. am I reading this right, that for the rest of this year and next year, we'll have one extra blackout period during the transition? Is that correct?
Yes, and that's, there may even unfortunately be two.
Yeah.
In May and June of next year. And again,
It's somewhat speculative, isn't it, in terms of the date of the approval of the regulations? Or isn't
it is
either one or two, depending on the timing of the approval.
Well, we didn't. Let's see. We didn't know when the regs would become effective relative to the January filing period. So rather than, I think it was largely rather than make a promise we couldn't keep and say this board, we definitely will be able to make apportionments at this board, and then, by some twist we couldn't, and we'd have to go back, and that it would be, well, unfortunately, cleaner from I think, passing the regs purpose and the regulatory process, but that the downside is missing a month
I think
or
there's
two.
going to need to be a transition. I think it's the right approach that you're taking. My question, though, I guess, is more about timing.
Okay.
It's more about how much bond authority do we have left in this period of time that we're talking about through this transition. And it looks as though when we get to the point where it's going to work great and there's going to be 6 months solid, is there really going to be an apportionment to be made by the time we get there? And I'm just concerned that while we do have bond authority for the time being today, is the timing of implementing this helpful in getting the apportionments out when we run the risk of having too fewer apportionments, when we do in fact have bond authority? I would just suggest we look at that. I just don't know what the timing of the remaining bond authority, where our unfunded list looks like. I think it'd be important that we get as many apportionments out as we can. Mm-hmm. And I think the transition is an important piece, and I think you're doing it right. It's just, if it's going to add fewer opportunities to make apportionments while we do transition, while we have few dollars left to apportion, I don't know if now is the right time to make that change. Maybe it's a decision that we do after we've run out of bond authority to make the transition, so that we can ensure that we have enough apportionments to be made while we still have bond authority. So it's something to consider. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I'm done.
Right now, we still have about, as of the April board, we have $1.8 billion on the unfunded list right now. At the current certification round we had a little over $700 million in requests, and only $619 million in bond sales in that time. So we'll have plenty on the unfunded list to be able to keep giving out apportionments, if that's what you're getting at.
It was actually that if we have the money to make the apportionments, but if we go through the transition, we'll have fewer opportunities to make those apportionments. And I was just wondering if maybe it's not better to keep as many opportunities while we still have the ability to make apportionments as best we possibly can, and then hold off the transition till the point where we've determined that we don't have the money to make apportionments anymore, and then make the transition at that point.
And if you look at the chart on page 6, at the bottom during the hump period, the transition period, the only one that I see that's maybe a danger sign, given if we look at an April bond sale, the one that, and then the ability to make the apportionment that we're doing now in June, that could be jeopardized somewhat by that one piece right there. But isn't these exact dates are also somewhat dependent upon when the regulations are approved too, in terms of where this actually ends up, or are we writing this in? This transition period's written in?
The transition period would be written in based on an assumption that a proposal would become effective, the new regs would become effective around January, February, March of next year, so that we could say with a bit more confidence that a new May filing period could happen, but not that the January 2013 one would be unchanged.
Yeah, because right now the current regs say that this period will start in January, and the regs, as they read it right now, will say they are valid into the next cert round begins. So assuming the cert round's already open and we're running in January, we can't have the regs change midstream and all of a sudden change the dates. So we keep it consistent. The reg's still in for that particular period when the next one begins, just like they said before. And then that point forward is where we make the change. That's why we can't write into the regs, well, if they're approved before this date, then here's the end date. But if not, we tried that when we first created these, and OL wouldn't go for that. The best we got was the first round started when the regs were approved, and from that point forward, we created this process. But that's why that dead board is there right now, is we don't know when the regs will be approved.
Okay, I just wanted to just kind of explore that a little bit if we could, but I just think there might be that possibility we could run afoul. I think changing it to the end of the next filing period we can do that right now, and I think that's a great idea. I think that picks up an extra filing period for us, or an extra 2 months to make apportionments immediately. And I think that's something we can do now, which is great, as opposed to making the changes. Maybe I think the changes to the dates could be done a little bit later. I'm just a little not sure of the timing of everything. I'm a little hesitant that we might run fewer opportunities to make apportionments. But again, I just want to point out, it's a great idea. I think it's important as we go forward that the DOF knows exactly how much they need to go out and sell, and I think what you're doing makes perfect sense. I just can't maybe see it very well in the write-up to be 100% sure that we're not going to lose an opportunity to make additional apportionments. Maybe go the other direction.
Yeah, Mr. Odell can elucidate further on that.
Brian Odell, Office of Public School Construction. We spent a lot of time thinking about that, and that was something that we were trying to address as well. If you look on page 7, though, at the top, the current process, it's attachment D. If we don't make any changes to the regs at all, we would have 2 dead boards during that time period as well. The transition round would just switch which boards are dead boards and which ones aren't. So we're not adding any more dead boards. We're just adjusting it in order to line it up. As far as changing it just to the end of, problem is we're not sure we could get emergency track. So any changes we make probably wouldn't take effect or wouldn't be approved until sometime in January or maybe February. So even changing just the one word to put it at the end of the filing period would come in effect probably in January or February. So knowing that there's already going to be a cert round, people are making, saying, yes, I can do it within 90 days, and then all of a sudden we change what boards, what boards they can make apportionments at or not could impact whether someone could make a yes certification or not. So knowing that, we tried to keep the filing period the same, the 30-day period the same. The round would end at a different date and then pick up at the very next, at the bottom of page 7. Then starting June or July 1st, we then have the new process completely in effect.
Yeah, and
that was, and we're definitely open to suggestions, but knowing that we're not sure exactly when these regs would be in effect, knowing that there would already be filing rounds in process at the time, we're trying to make that transition as easy as we could. That was our goal, and not try to change the rules of a round after people have already made the 30-day period. So that was that was our thought process.
Yeah, and I think as soon as we get to what the process has shown at the bottom of page 7, it's really the sweet spot, because we're there. There's no, maybe we should find a different term besides dead boards, but there's no there's no board at which an apportionment cannot be made. And so I think that really is the best situation for school districts and for getting funding on the street. So it's just, how do we get there with the least disruption? Yeah.
Bill,
timing. Yes, sir.
When do you think these regs will be, if we approve them, what is the timing to get these adopted?
Well, we're planning on taking them to the board. Are they on for June? Yeah.
Okay, and then when do you think they'll be?
Well, that's the question.
Well,
I mean,
usually our staff is pretty good about turning these around within a couple of weeks and starting the entire OAL process right away. We don't,
okay, so
the day after the board, we're already moving the paperwork.
So in the perfect scenario, when do you think these will be adopted?
We were told maybe sometime in January, early February.
2013?
Yes.
Okay, so then the earliest this could really be implemented would be? May of 2013.
Right, right.
That's kind of what, in the best case.
Yes, yeah.
I'd like to entertain any comments or questions from the members of the audience. If that's okay with the board.
Good morning, Lyle Smoot, Lyle Smoot Consulting. Just a simple comment, I hope. I think I see the need for these things, and those are good things. I want to reiterate that a lot of these problems would go away if you just made an open filing period and let people file whenever they wanted to. I understand that that's not going to happen, so I'll just say it for the record and let it go. But the real issue here is I don't quite understand why we go from July 27th to August 25th, January, et cetera, seems to me like if you want to change that and you want to simplify the program, you make November and May your filing periods, not some made up date in the middle of it. Just make November and May. That's pretty simple. And then your effective dates for those applications are January through June and July through December. It seems to me like that'd be a lot easier for people to remember going forward, assuming that this is a going concern concept and that this is going to be a long-term thing. Seems to me like you simplify it a lot just by everybody understands November and May, that's your dates, and your January through June, July through December. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Agreed. That would be easier. The reason that we chose unfortunately, second Wednesday is wordier. But the idea was filing period goes from May to June, and that gives OPSC time to put the data together for Department of Finance on July 1st. That if the filing period was the month of May, the information would be a little less timely, and the June board items at that point, which what filing periods requests are we submitting to the June board? So anyway, maybe Brian can help with that. Or
No, well said. Yeah.
Maybe.
The reason is
Thanks, Brian.
No, I didn't mean that sarcastically. This is a conversation we had probably 8 times, and I'd forgotten about it, so I'm glad he brought up that point. The reason it went to the middle of the month is because then, when the 30-day filing period ends, we then have 2 weeks to get that list together and present it to the Department of Finance. It would be public for everyone to see, but it would then be available for them to have that July 1st or January 1st. Anything else, and we start running into maybe we're going to miss the deadline. If we pushed it back earlier from like May 1st to June 1st, all of a sudden it didn't work with having 6-month filing periods where you need the filing period and the 6-month rounds. You need the filing periods to match up with the following 6-month rounds and then start the cycle over again. If we did it from the beginning to the end of the month, it wouldn't work. And we played with the dates so many different times, it just didn't work that we could find out. So it would be easier, but that was in order for the Department of Finance to have that information for the bond sales. That was what we came up with.
And filing period, let me try again. The request during a May, if it was May 1 to May 31, we wouldn't necessarily be able to get those to the June board.
Yes, that's true.
So you guys were probably here when the original rounds were set up, and I was just wanted to ask, or who was here, or someone, why did we not go with an open filing period, which is what Mr. Smoot mentioned? Can somebody tell me what the pros and cons were, or what the board decision was, and why that?
The main concerns were about stale certs, and also from the staff's point of view, it was maintaining an ongoing changing list. We wanted a set published list that was known. These are the yeses. If you had ongoing certs where districts can just get on, get off wherever they want, no one can plan for that. By having these set rounds, you know, we're working on it right now. We give a set list to the finance. They know exactly what they need for a bond sale.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hancock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bruce Hancock, Hancock Park in DeLong. I just, very briefly, I wanted to thank the State Allocation Board and this committee, and in particularly OPSC, for working on this issue that was brought forward on behalf of the Oceanside Unified School District. I think the solutions here go a long ways towards addressing that concern, and I just wanted to say thank you very much on behalf of Oceanside for all the efforts that have been put into, and frankly, in introducing even some other improvements beyond their particular requests. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, any other comments from the committee? So go forth and prosper. So I wanted to say I've been involved in probably, 4 or 5 meetings internally regarding this, and I would have to say that the complexity of the issues are amazing, and I think the staff's done a great job of looking at a whole bunch of different options and trying to satisfy a number of different masters, if you will, and the fact that we came up with something with a process that in the end has no dead periods or no periods where the board's unable to make apportionments is, I think, really, it's right where we want to be, I think. Mr. Pregman, did you want to come up?
Yeah, Bill, setting aside the date issue.
You got to use the microphone. We haven't seen you in a while. Can you tell us who you are?
Saving this all up. Ron Pregman, WLC Architect. Setting aside the date issue, have we looked at perhaps making refiling for projects easier on districts? Is it possible that they don't have to go through the board and all the rest of that when nothing has changed and a simple letter could say, yes, we are interested in the next filing period? I just have a lot of clients that complain to me and say, look, why am I redoing this again when, I just fell below the line, and yes, I'm still interested in a priority of funding and nothing has changed. Why are we making districts jump through the same hoops, going back to the board, doing all that, getting all those things and resubmitting? I don't know if that's in reg or what.
Maybe you could help maybe Michael could help the committee. Could you remind us what a district has to do to recertify, say?
Yeah, we have the procedures published on our website, and it lists 3 bullets basically that you're certifying to, that you're waiving your normal 18-month requirement and a couple other ones. And all a district has to do is they send us a letter. They can copy and paste that right off our webpage into their letter with the project numbers that we would like to participate. When the round expires and the next round comes around, all they really need to do is redate the letter and remail it.
But don't they have to go back to the board and get the approval?
There's no board certification required, just a letter from the district representative.
Then okay, I rest my case then. I thought they had to go back to the board. All right. You'll never get those 2 minutes back in your life, but other than that.
Well, and I think the part of another facet of this discussion of priority and funding is going to begin at the upcoming June board meeting when we talk about the issue of districts that have unfunded approvals but have not gone in for any certifications or for a limited number of certifications, and so that's a kind of a corollary to the discussion here, and we're going to begin that process, and I know that Mr. Gibbs has brought that up at several points in the past, so we'll begin that discussion in June. But thank you to the staff and to Michael for preparation on this item. I know. It's going to be a brief meeting. Okay, so our next item is on K-8 facilities and minimum educational facilities, MEFs. And I'm going to ask Brian Odell, and I want to welcome Brian Lepask up to the table for this one. And this is an item that came about as a result of an appeal that was filed from Sequoia Union School District related to a K-8 school that had a shared gymnasium, multipurpose room, and the board asked that we take a look at this and whether or not we could provide some additional flexibility for school districts. And so I want to turn it over to Brian and Valerie Castro.
Hello, Brian O'Dell, OPSC. With me is Valerie Castro. Just wanted to point out a quick error. If you look at the title, it says hybrid minimum educational facilities. It should say minimum essential. We know that more than just these administrative things are necessary to educate children. Classrooms are involved as well. So that was just an error. So we apologize for that. But I'd like to turn it over to Valerie, please. You got to write down below.
Yeah.
Yes. You look at it 50 times and you miss things like that, so we're sorry. But we'll correct it for next time.
Good morning. I'm Valerie Castro with OPSC. As Bill mentioned, this item is in response to direction from the State Allocation Board to revise our regulations to address a situation regarding minimum essential facilities at K-8 school sites. The SFP regulations permit a district to request a use of grants to build minimum essential facilities such as multipurpose rooms and gymnasiums, but they don't address certain scenarios that are faced by some K-8 school sites, such as a gym and multipurpose room that are located within the same building structure. Last fall, there was a K-8 one-school district that submitted an application requesting a use of grants to expand an existing multipurpose room to include a full gymnasium functionality for its 7th and 8th grade students. The OPSC was unable to process the application to the board based on our current regulations. The regulations authorize funding for a new MEF at an existing site that does not have an existing or adequate facility of the type being requested. The existing multipurpose room met the square footage criteria in our regulations, so the expansion request could not be funded. However, the regulations did authorize funding for a separate gym facility for the 7th and 8th grade students because there was no existing gym on that school site. The district appealed its case, and the board voted to consider the expansion area of the multipurpose room as a separate gym and approved only those costs related to the expansion area. This situation appears unlikely to occur in facilities other than a multipurpose room and gymnasium hybrid because other MEFs within the same building would serve clearly separate functions. However, the floor space in a multipurpose room may already be used for indoor phys ed, so the addition of space to create a full gym function would typically be considered a multipurpose room expansion project and not a gymnasium construction project. It also appears unlikely that this situation would arise in K-6 school sites, which are not eligible for a separate gymnasium, nor in middle school or high school sites, which are likely to have a separate gym. We're bringing this issue to the Implementation Committee for discussion. Do the regulations need to be changed to address all K-8 facilities, or should the change be focused on addressing only the specific school district issue at hand?
Fred, did you want to talk?
Just a couple thoughts. Whether other grade levels, K through 12, smaller high schools sometimes have those combined features also. So a small high school without the full athletic program may have a combined gym and whatnot. Cyber cafes that are sometimes designed sort of a small eating area. Oh. Okay, from the beginning. That there may be other hybrid spaces that we aren't even aware of as different programmatic things come through. So whether it's necessary to restrict it or be able to accommodate other variations.
Dennis?
K-8 facilities are a very strange type of facility. It's as many districts have been transitioning to that, you run up against these, whether you take a middle school and convert it to a K-8, in which cases you're overbuilt, perhaps, or if you take an elementary school and convert it to a K-8 in your underbelt because you have a multipurpose. I would say that for the purposes of an 7, 8, or middle school, and I'm not an educator, but for the purposes of PE and athletics at the middle school level, a multipurpose room is not the same by any means. And there's a lot of things. If you were to take an existing multipurpose room, which typically has a VCT floor over over concrete, which is not good for athletics, and go to a middle school, which would sometimes, not always, but sometimes have a wood floor, which is much better for athletics. There's a lot of things that you have to do, and as the MEF's the chart says, for a middle school, you might have shower lockers. However, many districts are going away from shower lockers. But to me, converting a multipurpose room to a true gymnasium for 7, 8 goes far beyond just adding some square footage. You have a lot of things that you have to do to the existing facilities as well. So I think it needs to go a little bit further than just adding the square footage.
Well, in the case of this particular district, they did do some changes to the existing floor in the multipurpose room, but that cost was not funded by the board.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. It should be. It should be. And there was another thing in here. You haven't gotten this far. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but there was a case of the 60% rule, and I'm not sure I understand where that 60% value came from in terms of, I guess it's adding the square footage. If it's less than 60% of the original or something, I'm sorry.
Well, that's part of the determination of whether the existing MEF is considered adequate. And we take a look at the existing population at the school site and the population that would be covered by the expansion. And then we calculate that by the appropriate square footage that you see on the chart, attachment B, I think it's on page 13. It tells us for the type of project, whether it's middle school or elementary school, how many square feet to multiply the students by.
Right, but why are we going with 60%? Because by definition, the chart is minimum essential facilities. And if you're not at the minimum, why are you looking at 60% of the minimum to see whether the existing is adequate or not? I would say that the chart should be the minimum. If a site does not have that, maybe Fred.
Well,
Fred knows
that was
more.
a discussion, I think, that was argued 100%. It was argued, so 50% was halfway between, and it was argued to make it 60. And there you have it.
So it was arbitrary.
No, it was. It was
a reasoned discussion.
Yeah, and that's.
Well, could we step back just for a second? So on attachment B, that's page 13, right? That's what you were looking at first. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Yeager, are these square footages in here? Are these derived from Title V? I told you this was your item to shine on.
Title V.
In other words, these are square foot. This seems to define what minimum square footages are for the different types of spaces for educationally appropriate facilities, right?
What Title V mentions is that the space shall, like for the gym, shall be adequate for the program described. Doesn't say whether it's 10,000 feet or 8,000, because that will vary based on population.
Sure.
So, and similar for some of the other multi-purpose and libraries and the like. So
was CDE involved in setting up these?
Yes.
Okay. I just wasn't here,
yes,
so I'm
this was
before my time.
Jim and Phil spent.
Okay, and that would be who?
Jim Bush, the immediate past me, and Phil Shearer, who was King Phil at OPSC. That's when the initial regulations came out. That was worked upon. And it has a lot to do with like the multi-purpose room on the code ratings of assembly and the like.
So these were scientifically arrived at.
And of a CIF competitive basketball court with an appropriate room around it. I don't believe it included area for bleachers, but it was the court.
Bruce, we have someone who may have some personal knowledge, contemporaneous knowledge of this.
Thank you. Bruce Hancock, Hancock Park in DeLong. I'm coming up, Bill, because I thought your question was really on point about the MEF chart. And I think I do agree with Fred. It was developed by those gentlemen primarily. There was a purpose, though, that it was developed. And the reason I come forward today is because I feel that that purpose is continually being redefined. And it's very troublesome. And so I just, as Lyle said on an earlier item, he had little hope for it, but he just wanted to get it in the record. I feel the same way about this. I note that in the plan review findings in OPSC, the MEF is constantly used as a measure of whether facilities are overbuilt or not.
Are
overbuilt or not. It was never, ever intended for that purpose. The MEF was developed, and now I'm searching back in a very faulty memory, but my recollection is it was primarily and originally developed for the purposes of the facility hardship program, where it was important. The state was stepping forward in that program to help school districts that had lost essential facilities. But the state was also saying that we are not going to build back anything at all. We're going to build back enough, or, I hate the word, but minimum essential needs. And so it was for that program, in my recollection, that MEF was developed, and I see it being used for many other purposes now, as though the state has actually established some sort of a minimum that is acceptable for all facility, or maximum is another, yes, that is acceptable in facilities. And I watched appeals that go if they have more than what the MEFs show. It appears in plan review findings on, I guess, most, if not all, applications, as though it were a standard against which to be measured. And yet I think the people who developed it, Jim Bush and Phil Scher, would just totally disagree with those interpretations. In fact, I would ask CDE to weigh in on this, not in this forum, but elsewhere, on the use, the proper use of these minimum essential facilities. So I realize that that's not exactly what this item is about today, but your question was, I thought, on point, Bill. Thank you.
Bruce, thank you for that background. That's good to know. Do you know if there's any correlation between the grant amounts? Because when we provide new construction grants for a new school, part of those grants are intended to build these facilities. Do you know if there's a connection there? If there's
there was not.
To establishing the square footage is what I mean.
No. Matter of fact, that to reinforce kind of what Bruce is saying, the whole intent of the grants was to strip away the design. In other words, districts can fundamentally, in new construction program, design whatever they want. The problem is they have to find the additional local share. You've capped your state obligation based on a grant amount, but there's nothing in the fundamental original program that precluded them to design what they wanted. I mean, and so there is that creep. I agree with that in some ways, other than it's used for like joint use in a few things. But the original fundamental intent of grant was, no, the state, we're stripping away the authority of the state to basically manage the design of a school, and we shifted it locally.
I think all that the blurb you're talking about that may come in a 15-day letter saying, you're building past what's provided, that kind of thing. I think the intent of that is merely just to point out that if you are building these large gymnasiums, whatever, it could impact your ability, and that's what it says. It says it may impact your ability to complete the project within the grants that are provided. I think that's all we're really pointing out. I'm not sure if we're saying this is a maximum, you shouldn't be exceeding it. It's just more of an informative.
Brian, I agree with that. I think it's put in the letter with the best of intentions to caution folks that they may be exceeding the allowances of the project, if that's the right term. But it legitimizes the use of MEF for those kinds of things. It's part of the creep. In and of itself, it isn't particularly dangerous or offensive, but it begins to legitimize the use of MEF as some sort of a state standard. And you asked the question about, was there a relationship to the grants and MEF? The answer to that, as Gary said, and I'd like to just reiterate, is an unqualified no. There was no relationship. The MEFs were developed afterward, in my, again, faulty recollection, and had no connection at all to the amounts of the grants. In theory, the grants were developed out of a research project that looked at the typical cost of lease purchase projects and did some probably not particularly accurate interpolation of those costs of a group of projects done in that program. And then that was determined that, well, therefore, based on this study, X a number of dollars would accurately represent each pupil's share. And so MEFs was not a part of that, and I would urge every one of us involved to be careful that we don't inadvertently create a standard that the authors of SB 50 absolutely wanted to divorce themselves from, and we're creeping back to it again, and that is that the whole idea was under SB 50 was, here's your funding, don't come back. Grant and go. Build what you need to build. I think some of the things that have been imposed since probably are very arguably good things. For instance, if a district receives funding for 20 classrooms worth of children under this program, it's got to show it's building 20 classrooms. I don't know that that really appears anywhere in SB 50, but it seems like a reasonable thing. One could argue, I think, that SB 50 didn't even contemplate that necessarily. But beyond that, I think you really run a risk of beginning to impose restrictions and requirements and standards that don't actually exist.
Can I mean, now I'm maybe a little naive, but wouldn't we want as a state to have a minimum standard if we are going to provide facilities? That's the word I used. I mean, in other words, we have Title V that says here are the standards for facilities in California, and don't we want to have those as a minimum standard? So every school district has at least the minimum facilities for educating our pupils?
Bill?
Yes, sir.
I think this is very, very similar to building codes and Title 24. The codes are intended to be a minimum standard to have safe facilities. They are not the standard. However, they are all looked at as being the standard. If you meet the code, you don't have to go any further. However, here we've got educational purposes that you may, if you say this is a minimum standard, the state is going to eventually accept that as being a standard instead of a minimum standard, but that conflicts with the educational purposes of the local districts.
And I think I understand what Bruce was talking about in terms of somehow that this becomes a maximum instead of a minimum that you can't exceed, and then all of a sudden you're in trouble. But I guess I still would argue that there is some need to have a minimum standard for facilities in California. I mean, isn't that really what the Williams lawsuit is about? And isn't that
I'll tell you, one of the original intents was the state under SB 50 wanted to guarantee that there was adequate funding to build classrooms to house students. And that was the fundamentals of SB 50. In terms of the educational curriculum and program and design of schools, they were shifting that to local decisions. That was the whole initial premise. And that's why the linkage of grants is to actually students, which is to classrooms. And so that was and beyond that, they didn't want to get into any more complexity.
Okay.
So, Bill, I think it's important to keep in mind that what this talks about is what the state's willing to fund. Has nothing to do with what's minimally essential. Okay. So whether we change the name to state fiscal participation or come up with a different name, that may solve a lot of the problem. But this is what the state says we're willing to do.
And I think this is good. We're having a broader discussion than this narrow item here, but I think it's a really good discussion. So don't go away. Can we let? Okay, sure.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Fred, maybe you can enlighten me on this, but if I'm not mistaken, in the lease purchase program, I know that there were the square footages that were in that program were broken down. I can't remember if that was Title V that did that, or if that was just regulation.
A suggested, like 30 of the 30 of the 55 were for classrooms, 3 for multi-purpose, 2 for quarters, so on.
I think that was the basis for the MEFs. Originally. And if we look at that, those, I mean, is widely accepted, and your office has done a study of the square footages per student across the country, and we found that California is at the bottom of that list in terms of square footages. So just from the get-go, that minimum is below the standards of the rest of the country. So, a minimum, like Bruce says, a minimum is just that. It's a very minimum. And if districts want to build more than that and have the need to build more than that for educational purposes, they should be allowed to do that.
Kathy?
I'm a little hesitant to say this only because it's globally. I'm thinking globally here. I would hate to see us dial down and address maybe this specific issue, and I know that's one of the write-ups in here. Should we just take care of this particular, do the regs need to be changed to address K-8 facilities, or for now should we just deal with the problem at hand? I think we just need to remember that as districts are struggling to adopt budgets and are cutting and slashing, we are offering and providing education differently than we ever have before. And so grade configurations are morphing very much different than they ever have before. So I don't know where that plays into here, but I would hate to adopt a regulation that then just doesn't quite fit somebody else's problem, and then we're back here again 6 months from now. So it's a bigger problem, a global problem, but I think we just need to be open to the fact that delivering education is going to look different, and already does look different than your typical K-8, 9-12, or K-6, 7-8, whatever it might be. I have a 6-12 high school that.
So hold that thought, because I think, let's get back to that. Let me ask Mr. Gonzalez, because he came up to the table.
Good morning, Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I wanted to bring in a little bit more history into this, where actually Dennis was heading. The original program was set up, the original lease purchase program was set up with essentially 59, 82, and 95 square feet, depending on what grade levels you had, and then there were square footages for the severe and non-severe kids. Those 59, 82, and 95 square feet were essentially broken down within OPSC's guidelines, and they had them at the time. How much of it should be dedicated to classrooms? Doesn't mean they had to be, but how much of that was really kind of inferred for classrooms, multis, libraries, etc. And that's how those square footages came about. Within that program, once you had the number of kids that you were going to assign to the program, it determined how much square footage you were entitled to. Unfortunately, there were times when we were building small schools, and there weren't enough kids to generate even the size of a couple hundred square foot multi-purpose room. So there was a provision in there to add additional square footages or waive existing area to create a minimum size type of facility. This is where the genesis of this particular program came from, is that there was a recognition that their small projects, small schools, could not build an adequate sized facility, and therefore the state would supplement the district's needs up to a point, and that point was this level. I would call it the maximum contribution of the state for facilities here. Not necessarily a minimum essential, as I agree with him. We start talking about minimum, you know, don't want to be having that as being our a normal standard. That was based on elementary, K6, 7-8, or 6-8, and 9-12. And if you'll notice, even in the language of the regulations, it says the minimum essentials for elementary pupils. It doesn't say elementary school. It says elementary pupils, and middle school pupils, and high school pupils. And in the original discussions of the lease of this program here, it was understood that we really were talking about if we're serving kids in this middle school category, they're entitled to having a multi-purpose room and a gymnasium. Okay, so just because we have a K-8 campus, the 6-8 or the 7-8 component of it is entitled to a gymnasium. It isn't intended to say that just because it's a K-8 school, it makes it an elementary school and therefore it doesn't get a gym. And I want to make sure that's in there. And I know that's not entirely the scope of our discussions here.
Well,
but it is
actually,
a little piece of it.
It is part of the
a piece
discussion,
of it,
actually.
because we're talking about a hybrid. Should a district be allowed to have at an elementary, at a K-8 campus, two different buildings, and I think OPSC has shared that they agree they could have a multi and a gym. But what do you do about a school district who doesn't have the funding to build both of those facilities and want to expand their existing multi-purpose room so it can serve both the capacities of a gym and a multi-purpose room?
He segued right back into the item.
Exactly. So essentially, I'm still saying to you, there's at least, at the very least, you should be able to provide, in the case of, in this one case, the area that the 7th and 8th graders, or 6 and 8, depending on how you want to cut the pie, their square footages for minimum essential gymnasium, and have them allowed to be able to add that amount of square footage to their project. Now, if that minimum essential square footage, let's say for the middle school is, I haven't got them all memorized. For the gym here is 6,800 square feet. They have a 4,000 square foot multi-purpose room. Hey, you know, let them go ahead and modernize some of that older part with the $6,800 square footage, $6,800 square foot amount of dollars, because that has to be done to make that whole thing usable as a gymnasium. But anyways, I wanted to share a little bit of that history and how that came about here.
So, I mean, tying back to what you said and what Kathy said, part of what I was thinking was that if, I thought naively that what we were talking about here was creating some additional flexibility for school districts. That, first of all, I don't see anything in the regulations that talks about K-8 schools or even K-12 schools, which we see a few of now. And I think Dennis talked a little bit about the fact that, and so did Kathy, education is changing. In the district that I was in, typically an elementary school would be converted to a K-8 because community members often wanted the option to have their child be able to stay in an elementary setting and not have to go to middle school with all those big tough kids, you know, or out of the neighborhood. I mean, a whole bunch of things. But anyway, K-8 schools, and you typically would take an elementary school and create a K-8, and you didn't have a band room, and you didn't have science rooms, and you didn't have a gym. And so you may not have had a large enough library either, obviously. Yeah. So I was naively thinking that part of what we could accomplish if we went forward with this would be to work with the California Department of Education and try and develop some standards here that would include K-8s and would also allow unique facility types, hybrid facility types that could be accommodating of the educational curriculum needs of K-8 students in that setting. And so does that make sense in terms of where we're...
Well, I think in that scenario, because this was for use of grants. So now
Yeah, well,
we've opened the, so now we're down to facility hardship, and, it's a much larger.
Okay, so can somebody explain to me, sorry, Paul, so how does use of grants work? I mean, I don't want you to, I just need, can you just explain to me real briefly how it works in this context?
Basically, the way they work is a school district, a school can provide, we can provide funds for whatever is lacking at that particular campus. So if they don't have a multi-purpose room, or if the one they have is below the 60% threshold that Valerie was talking about, which is just a calculation to see if they qualify for use of grants, that's all it is. Then we can provide that. We can provide funding for it. They can divert pupil grants that would otherwise be used to build classrooms out of their new construction baseline to build a multi-purpose room or a gym or a library if they're lacking that, or if the one they have is inadequate.
And can they?
That's really all it is.
Divert them. It would be from their district-wide eligibility, or
Yes.
just from the okay? So it's
Yes.
from their district-wide eligibility,
construction eligibility
to focus on one school site.
How does the use of grants, in that case as you had described it, differ from the facility hardship in which a district can, if they don't have the MEFs at a site, without using any eligibility, apply for a facility?
Well, facility hardship is for when you have a health and safety problem. So if you have a gymnasium that has mold in it and it's uninhabitable, then you'd qualify. You could qualify through facility hardship. The chart that's contained in the facility hardship regulations is what we use as for the use of grants to determine the square footage that they're eligible for. But in order to tap into the facility hardship program, you have to have a health and safety issue.
I thought there was a provision in there that if you didn't meet the MEFs, if you had like a rural school or something like that, that just had classrooms and they didn't have any administration space or any multi-purpose space, that you could apply for facility hardship and get those, even if it wasn't a health and safety issue.
Not that I'm aware of. It's only for, you could do use of grants in that situation. Facility hardships for health and safety. To do use of grants, yeah.
Now interject the thoughts of just a simple architect, not a regulator, just a simple architect. If you have a K-8, which is a K-6 and a 7-8, right? Mm-hmm. Why would the 7-8 part be anything different than a standalone 7-8? Why would there be any reason for that institution to not have 7-8, all the
money
necessary
primarily?
Well, now stop. I'm being simple.
Local funding.
I'm being simple. I'm thinking programmatically. Why would there be any rationale for not having the 7-8 facilities at a K-8 school? Where's the rationale for not having that?
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, but if
he wants to speak to the same topic.
I think what we're bumping up against is that the K-8 model, facilities-wise, is not an efficient model. And to expect the state to pick up the tab for that is where you're going. The model, there's funding models in place that do try to address some of these minimal essential facilities. But to expect that the state is going to pick up the whole tab because the district has made a decision to go K-8 as opposed to some of the other options that are available to them, I don't think that's necessarily appropriate. And to use a case study example where one school district felt that they got cheated out of doing what they wanted to do. They didn't get cheated out of what they wanted to do. They did what they wanted to do, but they didn't get the full state funding for it. All you're going to do is what Kathy said, is going to keep bumping up this again and again and again, and it's going to show up in your science labs, wood shops, home ec rooms, all over. It's necessary at the school district level to go K-8 often because you run into situations where you have a school in an area where all the kids have gone away and all the kids that are left, you got to consolidate them together. But to expect the state now to pick up the tab for
a whole gymnasium, plus a multipurpose room, plus a home ec room, plus a new science lab. It's not, I don't think it's reasonable.
I would agree, unless I'm wondering in this situation here before us if the other option the school district had actually cost more. So in other words,
yes, it did.
Yeah, so they're trying to save everybody money, themselves and the state
Right.
money. So in that particular case, you know, the argument has to be looked at a little bit differently. But I think that kind of flexibility would be very important to have, especially if it saves everybody money.
Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think those are great comments, and you know, this might not just be a one school district where we see this. It could be somewhere where they don't have space to expand. So, you know, they might want to just take the building they have and increase the functionality of it to have multi-purpose and gym space. That's I think the second component of this. Not just K-8s, but it's also having these hybrid projects on sites where you don't have space to build a gym and a multi-purpose room.
Yeah, I somewhat disagree with your comment, Paul, because I think that if a district were to take the 7-8 students or 6-7-8 students and build a middle school, the state would be chipping in a lot more than if they were to convert like an elementary school to a K-8, or several elementary schools to K-8s to cover the population there. So I think it's, you know, it could be an economical decision on the part of the district, and in that case, I think that, you know, it would be appropriate for the state to pick up that additional money.
I don't know about kicking in a lot more. I think what happens is your dollar goes a lot further because you're able to bundle your grant, your eligibility, and your grants. So when you go with the models that are more efficient.
If I could just say something real quick. I think one of the issues that we're talking about is in the case of this district, it's a very small district, 338 pupils that attend. So we're not talking about, you know, with their eligibility, they didn't really have the option of building a brand new school. This is very specific to their scenario, and so I think one of the things the board was wondering, should there be a reg to address just these type of specific scenarios like we're talking about, because it depends on the scenario as far as what is appropriate and what isn't. In this case, they felt like it was appropriate to go ahead and provide the funding to grant the district's request, but the question is, it doesn't really fit into our nice little table. So is there a way to tailor a reg, whether it be in wording or another column, a row, or something like that, that would be able to address these types of situations? And just a question that I have is, I think OPSC, we had never heard of this before. This was unique even to us. Had other people encountered similar situations to this district? Is this something that happens regularly, or is it fairly infrequent? I'm just curious.
Well, we're modifying K-6s into K-8s from time to time. I don't have state eligibility to do that, but I am having to do the work. So I would like to say that it's not unique. Okay. Maybe the fact that they're coming to you for funding is more unique, but I'm doing it just because I have to, and I don't have the mod eligibility. You know, I've already gone through one round of mod. Got to wait another 25 years.
Right, and that's another element too. Is that there's mod eligibility, which is part of the program, but this district was using new construction grants, so it's unhoused pupils, which is okay. It's permitted by the program, using unhoused pupil eligibility during the use of grants, converting that into MEF square footage. So again, we have I hate that word perfect storm because it's, or the term, because it's overused, but there's a lot of unique things that sort of fit together that you go, yeah, when SB 50, when the regs, no one thought of this, and I'm just wondering, is it because we were just short-sighted, or it's just very unique? I mean, it's a very large state with a lot of students. I don't know, or is it because things have changed? I don't know.
Fred. Well, I would say that it's not an uncommon design feature, especially in a smaller K through 8 school. And actually, I think that that was a almost sort of a reuse of another K through 8 process. So it's not unusual, and maybe the far-seeing vision of SB 50 was we knew that was a problem, so we didn't deal with it and let the locals. I don't know. We were smarter back then, maybe.
Well, would something like this be eligible under the mod program? Or, well, it's adding square footage.
It's
So
adding
no,
square footage,
it's a whole
yeah.
different thing. So again, you have all of these different types of programs. So is there a way to tailor a reg that would address these types of issues? I don't know.
Go ahead, Lee.
Just it was a question that Richard very much piqued my interest in this distinction between pupils and sites. And it seems to me that maybe this was interpreted incorrectly, because it's actually tied to pupils and not, is it an elementary school or a secondary school? And I don't know whether I'm off track on that or not, but I'm curious about that.
I would think, because it also ties in that the site doesn't have sufficient facilities, so I think that's where the site component comes in. The 60% was tied to, yeah.
Right, but the grants are tied to the specific pupils,
Yeah.
and those pupils are on that site.
But yeah, so there's a little disconnect perhaps in
That's right. Yeah, the pupil reference in here, I think, is referring back to how many pupil grants it would qualify for.
Also, one thing that was unique about this project is not that they were requesting the gymnasium for their middle school pupils. They could have built a separate building for that. What was unique about this request is that they were combining the gymnasium and the multi-purpose room in one building. So it was considered an expansion of the multi-purpose room.
Couldn't have built a gym with the funding available.
Right. So actually, and before Richard goes, in my internal involvement with this project, what was frustrating for me with the way OPSC was looking at the regulations, or maybe it was the regulations, was that OPSC was unable to say, well, you can have a separate multi-purpose room and you're eligible to build a gym, but you can't combine the two, because if there's no wall between them, we can't look at them as two different facilities. And that's extremely frustrating and inflexible. So that's would be one of my goals in this discussion. Yeah. So anyway, Richard?
I'd like to add a little more to that. First of all, the reference to pupils is not pupil grants. The pupil references in the regulations were very distinctly written for what kind of pupils are being served as to whether or not they should or should not have these kinds of facilities, not reference to the number of pupil grants or the type of pupil grants being assigned. It was specifically for pupils. Now, the flexibility, I'll tell you right now, I can recall a number of times when I've had staff, whether I was in or out of the state program myself, where we would have said, look, we'll just deem this to be a gymnasium. It is 2,800 square feet too short. Therefore, as far as we're concerned, we'll fund the additional 2,800 square feet, so it becomes a minimum essential gymnasium. But for all intents and purposes, you don't have a multi-purpose room now. Now, what I'm saying here is kind of a follow-up to what you've said, Bill. The school itself right now has a multi-purpose room, and for all, I'm going to guess 4,000 square feet, just to have a number. And it was deemed that it was adequate for this campus. That's fine. The district didn't want to have a multi-purpose room. They wanted a gymnasium. The gymnasium they were entitled to was 6,800 square feet, so they would have been entitled to the additional 2,800 square feet. So then you deem the whole building to be a gymnasium. Whether they use it as a multi and a gym combined, that's not material. Then later, if they end up growing and they want to file for an MEF multi-purpose room in the future, they should be entitled to do that, because they've grown and they would be entitled to those additional facilities. Do we need additional regulations? No, we don't need it. It's all here. It's all right here. We can. The middle school, the school serves middle school pupils. Yeah. And the middle school pupils are entitled to 6,800 square feet of a gymnasium. And if the school district wants to use that gymnasium as a combo, as a multi as well, that's fine. The multi is smaller.
But I'm not sure that we're there. I mean, I have a lot of respect for staff, and they're working with the regulations, and they're, you know, they interpret them and read them in certain ways, and it's not getting to where you just got with them the way they are.
But the chart doesn't say pupil grants.
No, you're right.
300, he said?
It was 330.
25, 27? That I would guess. I don't
They were
have the
also
details.
building 4 7th and 8th grade classrooms, so I'm expecting it's higher than that.
So but if there's 330 kids, there's, what, 40 kids per grade? So there's 80 kids, they're 7th, 8th grade.
Possibly.
So we're talking about 7th, 8th grade facilities for 80 kids. Okay.
Okay, so, sure, go ahead, ask the question. Mr. Rager's coming back. Can we have the Department of Education up to the dais, please?
We're talking about these types of hybrid, multi-purpose. They might call it a gym, but they use it as a multi-purpose or a gym. Does CDE have a definition of what the differences are between an MP and a gym?
Title V contains some features that should be in each, such as a multi-purpose room should have offhand space for serving, space for lunch, roofs high enough so that you could do, I guess, volleyball, basketball, features like that. And then it will describe things. Oh.
Excellent staff.
There we go. Let's see. A gymnasium shower locker shall be designed to accommodate multiple use activities in accordance with the planned enrollment. Specifically, it mentions it's secured from other parts of the campus. Shower locker is of sufficient size. Toilets are available. Office space for physical education teachers. Spaces available for specialized age-appropriate physical education, such as weightlifting, exercise, usage, and aerobics. A multi-purpose area shall be adequately sized and flexibly designed to protect students from the elements and to allow all students adequate eating time during the lunch period. So that talks about the size. If you have 800 kids, you need a certain amount. And to accommodate such uses as physical education activities, assemblies, and extracurricular activities. Should have tables or benches, easily accessible, stage platform, cafeteria line, food prep, ceiling heights to allow clearance of light fixtures for physical education activities.
So, and I think I'm just guessing that part of the reason that Brian asks the question is a real key piece of resolving the issue that brought this to a head was that the California Department of Ed eventually provided an interpretation of this facility indicating that it was a hybrid facility uniquely meeting the needs of the K-8 educational site. So anyway, I think that it is part of the resolution to this. So if I do think it would be helpful to at least pursue with OPSC and CDE getting together to look at how we could ensure the ability, either within the regulations or with some minor tweak, that we can have the flexibility to recognize hybrid facilities. And maybe we need to talk about the K-8 version. I certainly understand where Richard is coming from when he says, well, the middle school students are already on here and the elementary school students are on here, but so there seems like there's two parts of the discussion. So if CDE would be willing, maybe we could set up a follow-up meeting and work with OPSC to see how we could structure something that would at least give districts enough flexibility to be able to work, to have staff be able to recognize facilities like this.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And so this is related specifically to the use of grants portion of it, though, right? Or that's the goal?
I don't know. Tell me if it is, you guys. I mean, the use of grants issue, how does it play into that part?
Well, that was a specific, whether we wanted to use this as a segue into this, what's called the MEFs as for facility hardships, or, the whole...
the original item that Bruce brought up?
No, the original item, I guess we were going to discuss today was just for the use of grants portion for hybrid, or is it, a larger discussion on?
I think if we're intending to provide, if that's what the goal is to provide, to address these hybrid situations, I think that's part of it for sure. I think the definition of what they are and how they work together or separately.
We can go back and double check with the transcripts, but page 10, SAB direction, directed OPSC staff to revise the regulations to address unique cases related to K facilities, such as the appeal described previously, and to address the issue at the implementation committee. So that would be the focus, is these types of situations, staff says, I'm not sure it really fits into the regs, and the board says, no, we think there should be a way to make this happen.
So globally, anything not defined within there, whether it's a hybrid of some sort, we can't envision now. It just doesn't fit. Okay, so yeah, we can do that.
It could be a starting point, yeah.
Okay, is CDE in the process of revising Title V?
Right now, there are not any proposed amendments to it. It's always something we're looking at and thinking and tinkering with, but it would have to follow the process of hearings and
so where does CDE come down in terms of? I'm looking at page 13 of the attachment B, where it says gymnasium includes shower locker. And if you've designed a middle school recently or built a middle school recently, you know that no one takes a shower in middle school, okay? Nobody anymore. Now, we may have done that when we were kids, but there is no showering going on in middle schools. And we didn't like it then, according to Lee. But, I mean, so do these standards, does a gymnasium have to, the way it says on this chart, have to include shower and locker?
No.
From CDE's standpoint. Okay, so
I think it would say, what is your educational program, what's your community expectations? There are many middle schools that may just put none or a few or just do the rough plumbing.
A changing area, for example.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Well, in this case, it's talking about the square footage, so I think it's saying that the square footage
would include
that if it was in the plan. So it'd still be an option for the district, but in calculating the amount, you would include that when comparing it to the
Did you have a different dollar amount for that or something, wasn't it? Because it was...
there's a min and a max.
Right.
And Fred, to follow up on this example, I mean, of course I get confused, but basically it's a small K-8 school with about 80 kids that are 7A. If you take the minimum essential facility of 13 square feet per kid, that's 1,000 square feet allowed for a gym. How, where's the justification?
Do bowling or something, I don't know.
Do what? No, I mean, because I already have a multi-purpose room that's 4,000. I mean, how do you,
Yeah, I think there's a minimum of 4,000 feet or whatever, however they are. There is a floor.
The floor is 6, but...
it would be a minimum, and then there's a max that's, so many
But
square
I think
feet
we
per
have
kid
to
would
remember
cap.
in this particular situation that it's also being used for the K-6 kids as a multi-purpose room. So it's going to have dual purposes. So maybe what we're talking about is the increase from 5,000 to 6,000 square feet, the 1,000 square feet for the 80 kids is really what we're talking about. What I wanted to get back to Bill's point is kind of along this situation is the regulations speak to a minimum of 5,000 for a multi-purpose room and a minimum of 6,800 for a gymnasium for middle school pupils in elementary. Is the regulation that we're talking about is trying to recognize which one of these will now be the minimum on a K-8 school? Because I think the regulations, what I'm getting at is I think the regulations already establish what we need to do. It's really just that
for the pupils.
We just need to understand how we want to interpret what's already written here and how we want to apply it.
No,
and I think your discussion between CD and OPSC is going to be, I think, the solution here, because I think its standard has already been established, has been used. We have minimums, we have maximums. We just need to recognize how we want to interpret what we already have in print. I think is the solution here going forward. If we're not going to make any major wholesale changes, I think it really just needs to be an interpretation issue. Or we just simply leave it as it is and we just continue to do appeals on a one-time basis for K-8s.
My gut sense is that the board would probably rather have us wrestle with it a little bit and not continue to process this through the appeal process, but I'm just guessing.
Well, I think you said, you hit the nail on the head when that OPSC needs to look at this and come up with, if there's some reg that they feel needs to be in place, and so to allow them to interpret this more in line with the way the SAB is interpreting it, then OPSC should prepare the draft.
Great. Okay. And okay. Any other comments? So this is the first time in a long time that we've talked about educational facilities. So I think that's a really good thing. And Bruce, I appreciate your bringing up your comments regarding the MEFs, and I'm not quite sure where to go with them in the context of what we're looking at in the narrower sense, but I think I understand them a little bit. And I appreciate everyone's discussion and time, so we'll set up a meeting with the Department of Education and OPSC, and then we'll bring this back to an upcoming committee meeting. Yes.
Bill, I would just encourage, and I know you guys will do this, to ask school districts for input on the gyms that they've built, the things that they've done when they've converted K6s to K8s, when they've had their own local money, for example, and what they consider to be adequate gym space. Because I'm wondering about the shower locker, whether that got included. You know, the assumption was some shower locker, maybe or maybe not. I wouldn't want to decrease it because we're now saying, oh, we don't take showers. We don't have that anymore.
No, I see.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So our next meeting is July. I'm sorry, we've got some.
Just one question. We talked about whether it's going to be specific, to this issue.
Got to use the microphone.
Ron Perkin, WLC Architects. I don't know that we resolved, or this discussion did carry on, that it's going to go beyond just this one schools issue, because I could tell you we're working on converting a lot of schools to K-8s, and most of them are elementary. So if there is any policy developed, it has to be, I think, along those lines.
Well, and I think that from the broader standpoint, in my limited experience building schools and being involved in school districts, K-8s are becoming more of interest to communities all over the state, and so I think it's important for us to look at the big picture part of it.
Thanks.
Mr. Smoot, we're going to give you the closing comments in recognition of...
Thank you. This won't take long. I just wanted to know if this meeting between the Department of Education and OPSC to discuss this issue could be an open meeting, so regardless of whether we could participate or not, we could at least listen to the conversation.
I'd be happy to set it up, and we'll put it up on the website under meetings. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're finished early, but I think we got to a really good place on the first one especially, and it looks like we have some preliminary direction and next steps on this one. Look forward to seeing everybody July 13th, Friday.
Maybe.
What's that?
Maybe. It's a Friday. We may not be here.
That's right. There is some potential if we go into the new reduced workload for school for state employees. So we'll keep you posted.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.